Hello everyone, I am Tacit, and today I'm going to be going over the Gems of War event objectives for the Woolly Bully event, in which the Koo the Brave is added to the game. I hope all you guys have been having a wonderful holiday, and a soon-to-be Happy New Year's. So, of course, with it being the end of the year, or more so going into the beginning of the next month, we do have ourselves the event calendar, well, not for the entire year, but of course for the month of January. With this, we have a pretty backloaded month, with almost everything happening being in the last 2 weeks, with the main things that are pretty noteworthy being the start of the Lunar New Year event, starting on the 20th. We have the Lunar New Year pet on that Wednesday on the 29th, where we get the Year of the Snake for 2025, as well as, of course, a Void event weekend, and even a new campaign starting up on the 27th. So pretty much everything that's happening next month is happening within those 2 weeks, with the only other exception, I guess, being the Mythic that's coming out this Friday. With that being said, we do have the Mythic, of course, right here. Could be subject to change as far as when it comes out. Looks like it's kind of like a Takshaka alternative, but ultimately probably weaker than it in most situations. As far as what it ends up doing, it is a 26 mana cost, red, blue, yellow, and it deals magic +2 damage to all enemies, so pretty standard average AoE damage. And then creates a 13 gems of either blue, green, red, yellow, or purple. I assume this means all of them will be the same color, otherwise that is very weak if it's doing a mix of them. But I assume it means either 13 blue, or 13 green, or 13 red, like 13 all of that one singular color. If that's the case, this could be okay with things like Stellarix, with things like Wand of Stars, basically with anything that can end up absorbing all colors pretty equally and end up still being able to mana accumulate afterwards. Overall, that ability's pretty average as far as its use cases. There's just better ways to extra turn more consistently compared to this thing. And of course, if it keeps doing colors that aren't really on the board, like let's say it creates 13 blues when there's only like 2 blues on the board, that's not going to go over too well. As far as what his final trait does, it's pretty much an amplified trait of what Centurion has and a few other whips like that, where it has a 25% chance to create a 2 times. In this case, it has a 50% chance to create a 3 times wild card when hatching for a extra turn. Overall, the other ones that have a weaker version of this aren't really used too much for that trait, even though they do have access to it. And I don't really foresee this being much the same. It's probably not going to get used compared to like a Stellarix being able to do it consistently every single turn. And while that's not really as spammable as this, it does have a way better mana start at the beginning, whereas this has no real way to get off the ground. And by the time it's already off the ground, there's already so many other teams that can kind of do similar. But I don't know, we'll have to wait and see. This is pretty nice, but overall, I just don't think that's going to be enough mana to really justify doing it, especially at only a 50% chance rather than 100%. There's just so many other things that can do things per extra turn or just immediately at the start of battle that this probably won't end up seeing too much usage. And due to how random its ability is compared to something like Takshaka, which still has a somewhat random ability, but I feel like is at least a bit more consistent than what this will end up doing. Also, only 3 of the 5 colors that creates, of course, feeds back into itself. So if it gets really unlucky and doesn't really feed back into anything that can mana accumulate loop, you might find yourself kind of stuck. And overall, I don't know, it just seems a little bit too random for what would be consistent in the current meta of the game, but could still get used in Dragon's Claw if nothing else, as well as occasionally 4 times Dragon teams depending on the dragons they have access to, but probably more so a Dragon's Claw option when potentially missing some other things, or even just as a general mana accumulation for the kingdom. Other than that, we also do have a new bounty troop, as we do a bounty hunter this Friday. This one ends up bringing in an insta-kill mechanic to bounty hunter that might end up helping if you don't have particularly high damage, particularly for the final fight. It ends up having a inflict terror, so you can end up doing this onto the last slot on the opposing team to try to insta-kill it. This is probably not consistent, and you'd still want a way to end up killing out, of course, the rest of the team, but you might be able to secure a kill or 2 with this. For the most part, I don't think it's going to be used too much, but of course you do have to use it for this current bounty hunter that we're going to be having on this Friday. Anyways, with all that out of the way, let's go now into the teams. So, as far as the teams are concerned, for the week, all are in description below if you want to go and copy-paste any of them. Let's start all the way from the top, starting with the Journey event. The Journey event is a red Taurus restriction. You're allowed to use any hero class, though it is worthwhile considering using the Taurus hero class, as, well, for one, your whole team is restricted to Taurus, but also because it gives a 50% mana start to not only your hero, but also every single Taurus on your team, which is in your entire team. So, ends up helping out a lot. You do have to end up using the red Reaver in order to get the maximum amount of points during this Journey event. Keep in mind, unlike things like raid events and stuff like that, you do actually have to go and upgrade it. In order to get the maximum amount of journey points, you do have to make sure he is 3 times upgraded all the way to Mythic, otherwise you will be getting a partial amount of additional points. As far as the troop itself, it's pretty standard as all of them that we've been getting recently. Just does a bunch of mana accumulation, in this case red, boosted on whatever the troop type is, in this case Taurus, which will be your entire team if you are using a Shaman hero class. Overall, this is not the greatest amount on doing 10, but it can still end up getting its mana accumulation up, and of course does have shininess if you do want to get it a little bit higher. But for the most part, we're just using that red mana accumulation to feed into everything else. We are allowed to use any weapon here as well, since Taurus is not like a kingdom restriction or anything, so we are allowed to use any red weapon in the game, which of course means we have access to Wand of Stars. So we're going to be using that for mana accumulation, Red Reaver to offset it, and then whatever your damage sources are, depending on what you want to run. As far as the lower rarity range, your damage source is literally just him again. You do not gain any benefit from using more than one of him. However, unlike Bounty Hunter, you do not get penalized for using multiple of the same, whereas in Bounty Hunter you do, so do be wary of that on Friday. However, for this event, you do not get penalized for using multiple of the same, so worst comes to worst, you can just spam him, and he's probably your most highest damaging source, and can even loop into himself. So it's not like a perfect loop, but based on your options that you may have, it is probably worthwhile. Keep in mind you might have to buy an extra tier in order to be able to actually have more than one. For example, I think I spent 500 gems for tier 4, where I maxed them out with all the blue orbs, and then simply got tier 4 so we could put more than one on your team. Otherwise, you'll only be able to put one on your team. So do be wary of that if you do want to end up putting multiple, if he is going to be your primary damage source. As far as the faction event, this is for the Labyrinth, which is a green-red restriction, though of course in this game mode you are allowed to use any colored hero weapon. So for the first team here, we have a pretty standard Rowan quick kill team using our Scale Shield to end up amplifying the armor on Rowan to kill everything out. Mirage Queen to get things started at 50% mana start off of its final trait, and the Leprechaun for its empower into mass mana accumulation. Pretty standard, just quick kill Rowan. As far as the higher rarity team, we're going with the good old Double Tesla, or not very high rarity, but you know, higher level range. And for this, of course, since we have access to red, we can simply just use Leprechaun to get things rolling as far as our mana accumulation, and then go spam our Double Tesla until we win, and just using whatever mana accumulation tank you end up wanting to do. In this case, we're doing Mech with its barrier at start, as well as be able to Dispel to get rid of any submerges that would otherwise block Tesla's really high amount of armor damage that it does based on, or true damage that it does based on all enemy and ally armor. As far as the Pure Faction team, you basically want to make sure that your Horned Guardian stays alive. He is very tanky, so it should be pretty easy to do, but you want to make sure the enemy's Horned Guardian ends up dying and that yours stays alive. If you do that, you should be good to go on the level 500 Pure Faction or whatever Pure Faction you're doing on. The main thing that you want to do that is spam the Mechatar. It has a multi-silence, and you basically want to make sure that the enemy's Mechatar stays as silenced as possible, as well as the Horned Guardian, as well as ideally everything on the enemy team, just so they can keep hitting them down. Also, one other interesting thing, even though the hero class has a 50% mana start to all Taurus, the legend here also has 50% mana start to all Taurus, so keep in mind you cannot use this for the current journey event, because the journey event also includes a red restriction, which of course he is not red. So if you do want a 50% mana start in the current journey event, you do have to use your hero class as Shaman. You cannot get away with doing it with him. However, in this game mode you can, as well as Underspire if you do want to end up doing it for Underspire this week. If you don't want to have it on hero and you want to run like Elementals or something, you can end up running this, so you still have 50% mana start for all your other Tauruses for something like Underspire, as well as for this Pure Faction, of course, as you are restricted to it. As far as the Shaman class is concerned, the Shaman class event this Thursday, you're restricted to Tauruses within Wild Plains, which is good because most of the kingdom is already that. We're just doing a Black Manacle quick kill team. Feeding into Black Manacle, he has Mana Link into Brown, which gives you more mana, Empower to give you even more, and has to hit a purple anyway, so you're feeding right into the mana you need. And just do that to try to feed your Black Manacle or any weapon you wish that uses Brown, and you'll be good to go. As far as the Underspire is concerned, we were kind of already mentioning a little bit, though one other team that we can end up running that's a little bit riskier to run the other way around, but you can run it for this, is a Lord of Slaughter. So we're running this as the only troop in the entire game that has a 100% chance to ignore all armor whenever he does skull damage, essentially meaning all skulls are true damage as long as he isn't stunned. Has a really strong ability as far as overall damage they can do with a ton of skulls, and worst comes to worst, he might even get a free kill off of doing the Death Mark. Beyond that, you have a mass mana accumulation that you can end up doing with the Wild Cleaver. Just get a bunch of explodes, get a bunch of mana accumulation, and worst comes to worst, if your Lord of Slaughter does end up dying, you'll have resummon. Red Reaver, as your entire team in this case is still pure Taurus, so he is still getting the full 10 red gem spam, so you would still be able to go and mana accumulate for your Lord of Slaughter as well as back into himself. And Soothsayer just for a little bit of empower to get the little bit of mana going, and of course his Brown Link to help as well. As far as the lower rarity range, we're running a somewhat similar team, except we're putting Soothsayer into first slot. You don't necessarily actually want to cast him into context. It's mostly just to make sure he doesn't block while also giving you a Brown Link. Beyond that, we have our standard exploder, so if that does end up dying, you can end up resummoning something there, and it will guarantee be something from Wild Plains, which most of which are Taurus. This is relevant because the new trip that ends up coming out as well today ends up giving a bunch of life and attack to an ally, and if the ally is a Taurus, you can end up doing double. This normally isn't the greatest to be using, but given that a lot of Tauruses already gain a huge benefit from having higher life and or attack, this can end up having some synergies if you want to synergize with this legend or mythic that ends up gaining extra benefit, though in this case we're just throwing it onto our first slot. You could use really any first slot here. The Soothsayer is just to be less intrusive. However, you can put anything with high armor reduction or anything that gains a big benefit from it, or the strong deception that you end up having in order to go and offset it. But even something as basic as a Soothsayer only as a rare would be perfectly fine, as even though it doesn't have any score reduction or anything like that, it does end up having a power, so it's not actually mana blocking your team, so you can let everything else get rolling and not actually block for their mana accumulation. And of course Red Reaver here is still doing the same thing that it would be doing on every other team this week. And only other thing to really mention then is Bounty Hunter. These are not copy pastable, but of course as far as what they run, there are two main teams really to be running for Bounty Hunter. Main reason they're not pastable right now is because of course the troop out on this Friday is not currently released at the moment, so it is impossible to really make a team on it. However, there are two main core structures that you generally want to go down. The 3 Bounty Hunter troops, where you go 1 Bounty Captain into 2 Bounty Hunter troops, where you go 1 single damage source. In this case, we're running Stellaric, so you can run any damage source the entire game here. So you basically run Ogress, your best damage source, any mana accumulator you wish to assist with those two, and then the Bounty Captain for the week, which is the one that we were showing earlier, the one with the Terror mechanic. This is the one that you have to use that you would end up getting on the Friday Bounty Hunter event, which would be what would go in the 4th slot right there. As far as the full bonus team, one way that you can end up running this is going Ogress, Tagraki Warrior, Corpse Mirror, and then in the 4th slot, of course, being the Bounty Captain once again. This will give you the full 30 times points compared to the other one that will only give you 24 times points. However, this 24 times points team will win very, very quickly, especially if you own a Stellarix, but even without it, as long as you have a pretty good damage source there, even if it's just your hero with some kind of good weapon or something similar, should be perfectly fine. Basically, just whatever your best damage is if you just want to speed it up, if you don't mind spending a little bit more gems in order to get Bounty Hunter done even quicker. Beyond that, oh yeah, don't forget this calendar. Of course, we had the reward on Christmas, but we also have another reward on New Year's Day. So if you're not overly sleeping in at some point, do make sure to go claim the reward. It's probably something pretty small again, as per usual, but you know, adds up. A little bit of free gems and everything, so definitely make sure to claim it if you are around. Beyond that, what do we go over next? Let's go over to some other things we have going on this week. So some of it we already mentioned. For one, the Holiday Feast event. Of course, any unused points that you have laying around, you can end up still spending. You cannot earn any more points over the next week, as the 2-week-long event has already concluded. However, if you still have any points left to go and spend, definitely can still do so. Keep in mind, things like the dragon will be in the drop table at a later point, so you will be able to go and obtain them. I would say the biggest one that has not really been obtainable in the future has been all these golden pets. So if you end up spending 700 points here, you'll get the pet maxed after 500, and then after 200 more for 700 total here, you'll end up getting the golden variant. Keep in mind, the one that actually has stats will be in the drop table later down the line. However, so far these golden variants haven't really ever returned in any way, shape, or form. They're kind of just a little cosmetic thingy, but the ones that actually have stats do. So if you, that would just probably be the highest priority if you want to get something like that. Whereas the troop is not really that needed, as you'll be able to go get them a couple months from now in the drop table. The armor seems to return every single year, and the power orb that is even here anymore that we already got is you know, a resource you can get anytime. It's a really cheap power orb, but if you're pressed on points, I would definitely say go all in on the pet to hopefully get the golden one if you have the 700 total to end up doing so. Beyond that, this Tuesday, of course, we have the Green-Red Labyrinth faction, as we mentioned earlier with the team. Wednesday, we have ourselves the Taurus pet. Thursday, we have ourselves the Shaman class event. And Friday, of course, as it even mentions here, we have the Bounty Hunter event. As far as the Soul Forge is concerned, we have overall not too much. I would say if there's any one that seems somewhat okay, it would be the Elder Dragon. Very situational when you bring him out, but unlike all the other dragons that are similar to him in this gem spamming kind of sense, he actually supplies the boost ratio himself. A lot of the other ones, like Ella McGrim and similar trips like that, they kind of need assistance in order to go and get their full effect, but this one can do it completely on its own. It deals a bunch of damage to all enemies and then creates 9 curse gems, which of course will curse the enemy, are also brown gems. Boosted by curse enemies, so he applies the curse that he needs to be able to do his curse. Your first one, if you don't have a cursor on your team, will of course only be 9, but then every one, therefore, will end up being the full 13 gem spawn. So you can kind of just keep doing your 13, 13, 13 spam all over again, kind of like that one dragon that's coming out this Friday, except this is way, way more consistent when you end up getting it going. One other nice benefit of it is the elimination of magic. It eliminates 3 magic for all enemies when matching for an extra turn. Of course, depending on your game mode, this could be pretty weak, but depending on your game mode, especially in PvP-like situations, this definitely starts to add up, and you could really start to reduce down the enemy team's magic if it's a team that is very dependent on that magic. Beyond that, yeah, I would say that's the main one as far as Mythics, at least on PC Mobile. As far as weapons, there are a few handful of them that are probably worth grabbing. One of them being the... Is this the one? No, that's the one you get from the event. Where's the other one? Where's the resummon one we're using? There's 2 of them that are pretty good. The Wild Cleaver, this one you probably already saw us using, this brown-blue Explodey. It has a bunch of resummon, really good if you feel like you end up needing for something like Underspire in order to tank and make sure you don't end up dying. Underspire has quite a bit of damage this week, but not necessarily like the ability to stay alive. Like, I think we ended up showing... Did we actually... Wait, did I skip the team? No, I did. But, I was going to say, did I skip it? No, but yeah, we showed it on both the teams. And I'm not sure if I explained it then, but it's basically to make sure that you, if your things do end up dying, that you'll constantly keep having resummon for it. It's a little bit slower this way, but it basically ensures that you win every single fight. So it's a really nice weapon to have. Of course, any kind of resummon weapon tends to be good. And this one is just particularly good since it's one of the only few ways that you really have to do anything like that this week. As far as the Doom Spade, this is probably the highest priority weapon as far as options that you want to end up picking up from Soulforge. This is, if I was to say to pick up any one, it'd probably be this one. It's very situational when you use it, but with the Guild War changes around the corner, this thing will probably find its way into quite a few teams. So worth getting now is by the time Guild War actually does end up getting implemented and everything, this thing probably won't be around for like another half a year to a year. So if you haven't already gotten these, definitely keep an eye out for them. The ones that deal damage to the first 2 enemies, and then ends up creating a bunch of mana for that color based on all allies and enemies of that color. So basically, if there's ever a brown restriction, either for PvP or for Guild Wars or for anything at all, if your entire team is brown and the entire enemy team is brown, you're going to get a lot of brown spam every single time, up to a total of 16, assuming all enemies and allies are still alive. So really, really good, kind of like the old Journey troops as far as how strong this thing is. It does end up getting a double kill eventually, which will bring your gem spawn all the way down to 12 instead of 16. But for the initial time when it's 16, it is very, 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 very powerful and can even secure you pretty much as a free double kill in a lot of situations. So pretty good. A little bit of a high mana cost, but it's feeding so much mana back that it'll feed into the weapon and excess into all the other browns on your team. So it's not normally too big a deal. Getting it started is generally the biggest issue with it, as it's just only a 1 color 18 mana cost. But once it does get going, you pretty much keep going as long as you're not frozen or any other shenanigan like that might end up preventing your extra turns. But definitely worth considering getting as a very, very powerful weapon in basically any brown restriction that ever pops up in any way, shape, or form. So given that we have those new Guild War restrictions or whatever they're going to do with those, might be worth considering, as it might be very, very powerful in those situations. Beyond that, let's see, we did those. So as far as the guild related event, we kind of went over it, but as far as Journey, of course, the Journey troop, as per usual, has 2 times magic, and of course, you want to get him fully ascended, as he has up to 3 times score, only if you have him fully ascended. So in this game mode, it is very important to do so. In raids and evasions and stuff like that, you don't have to end up upgrading it, but in things like the Journey event this week, as well as Bounty Hunter this Friday to Sunday, those 2 events, you do actually have to upgrade them, as your score is dependent on how upgraded they are. And also, in the course, as we mentioned earlier, you do only have to use 1 on this. You don't get penalized if you use multiple, but you can use multiple if you so choose. So if you want to go for the extra reward here, you can end up doing so in order to bolster up your team with the, a bunch of double magic pokers. We end up doing this with tier 4. Basically, you go and, of course, get to tier 4. This gives you the weapon, which is pretty useless, unfortunately. There's not much you to really do with it. It doesn't do enough damage overall. But you would end up doing this weapon at 250 and then this thing at 500. And if you go and double ascend your Taurus with either 2 blue orbs or a major blue, ideally 2 small blues, that would end up getting him to Mythic, which would give you your max amount of rarity. And then by tier 4, you would have more copies of him, so you can go 2 of them on your team, 3 of them on your team, and yeah, it'll be good to go. So you do not get penalized for that, but keep in mind on Bounty Hunters Friday, you do. But you can get away with the double Red Reaver, triple Red Reaver, even quad Red Reaver, though I would not advise that over using at least 1 hero tank, either as Elementalist or Shaman or whatever you want to end up setting it as, especially if you have Wanda Stars to cover every color that you would be missing from having a full Red Reaver team. Anyways, but beyond that, just take bigger number. Journey's generally pretty straightforward. Anything that's bigger number, just take it and just keep doing that over and over again to get the maximum amount of points. You also want to end up winning in as few turns as possible, as well as not having any deaths on your team if you can end up helping it. So if you find you're dying too much, it might be time to switch to something like an Elementalist, which might slow down your team a little bit and give them a little bit less gem spawn, but make sure that you have the entangle, you have the barrier on brown. It'll help keep you a lot tankier if you find that you are losing some of the battles. So do make sure to switch off the Shaman hero class if you need to at any point. As far as the event key drop table is concerned this week, we got ourselves the Wild Plains. With that being said, I would say it's pretty skippable right now. The only thing that's pretty up in the air right now that I'm actually not 100% certain on is a couple campaigns ago we got King Stormguard, and I'm not 100% certain if he is in the drop table because I've been watching global chat here and there all this morning. And of course I'm doing it like what, an hour or two after you know, the launch of the patch thing, or no, not the patch but the weekly reset, and I've not seen a single person get the King Stormguard. It could just be that no one happened to roll it, so I'm not actually 100% certain if he is or isn't in drop table. Obviously there's 4 mythics here if he is, so even if he is in drop table, the chance that you specifically get him is pretty low. You probably still just want to wait until he rotates around his Soul Forge. It's way better to wait for Soul Forge and get him for 4,000 diamonds, especially since you might even want 2 of them to run eventually 3 of them on your team. So overall, I am not 100% certain if he's in drop table, and I would not open event keys with the assumption that he is, as there's a chance he isn't. So just wait till he's in Soul Forge. You're probably going to want to get at least 2 or 3 of them anyways, because his final trait kind of needs 2 or 3 of them. So if you currently have 0, you might actually want to like double buy him instead of just single, and that would be way better to do in a Soul Forge rather than trying to spend like 8,000 event keys, even if he is in drop table, to try to get him. Though if you do go for event keys, one thing that you might be targeting is Lord of Slaughter. Lord of Slaughter, really great troop. You started him a bit earlier, but he has a Doomstorm and start a battle, a bit of skull reduction. The only troop currently in the entire game that has a 100% chance to ignore armor when doing skull damage. A lot of things used to have this in the past, but now he's the only thing that still has it. And of course, a very powerful ability that converts a bunch of browns into Doom Skulls while also creating more browns, while also double death marking, while on top of all that, a little bit of free bleed if it wasn't already doing enough damage on top of everything else. So not only does it normally secure a kill or 2 whenever it casts, but you might even get another kill or 2 from the death marks that end up getting applied. So a lot of overall damage and a really great skull mythic, one of the top 5 in the entire game as far as overall power. Catches the ball is pretty average, kind of fallen off in recent years, but does get a bunch of boost ratio based on attack, life, and armor for a pretty big hit. King Stormguard, if he is in drop table, I don't believe he is, but he's pretty similar to Ketris, but has a bit of a better final trait. And then he creates 2 lightning gems whenever his turn begins, which of course, if you have 2 of them, that'd be 4 of them. If you had 3 of them, that'd be 6 of them. So stacks pretty nicely. And this is just doesn't do enough damage to ever justify using. Is actually probably one of the worst mythics in the game, Notorious. There are some rare circumstances where you might end up using it, especially if you don't have any of the mythics really. But beyond that, it just gains too much negative value from whenever it takes any amount of damage to justify how low its damage output is compared to the billion other AoE options that are currently within the game. As far as any other reasons that you would open up event keys, I would say pretty much no. It's pretty skippable. It is a very skippable week unless you're just looking to get the star level bolstered up for the kingdom. And any that are worthwhile, like the Lord of Slaughter or the King Stormguard, are probably just worth waiting until Soulforge, and just wait until they rotate around in Soulforge and just get them that way. As far as things that are not into drop table, if you are going for it, this includes the following, if I can remember what order they all are. So of course, the 5 troops from the Labyrinth are not in the drop table. Though do keep in mind, this troop is in the Rift for the Labyrinth. If you didn't end up getting it already, you can get it in the Rift, but you cannot get it in event keys. Other things that are not in the event keys are the Judgment, which is in the Vault Key drop table, the current Journey troop of, was it Koo the Brave? No, not Koo the Brave, the other one. The Red Reaver is not in the event key drop table. You have to get it from the current Journey event. And on top of that, I believe that is everything then. So just Judgment, the 5 faction troops, and then Red Reaver, because he's from the current Journey. Everything else that you see here is, but for the most part, I would say it is a pretty skippable week as far as event keys are concerned. As far as the new troop, of course, we have ourselves, how do we go over them easily? Actually, we'll do it through shop. So if we go to shop and go over to the weekly event, we have Koo the Brave. We mentioned him a couple times. We used them on one team. If you want to stock up on green, red arcanes, this is definitely a time to do so. Only costing 200 glory each as far as the pack is concerned, since you get 2 each time. And giving a bunch of life and attack to an ally. And if the ally is a Taurus, double the effect. I would normally say a trip like this is horrifically bad. However, there is a bit of an exception when it comes to them, just because nearly every Taurus, well maybe not every single Taurus, but a lot of Tauruses have a boost ratio based on how much life, attack, and armor they have. And this guy does 2 of those stats, and while this is definitely not the best way of doing it, given the context of the kingdom, when you're restricted to like, you know, only Taurus, only Wild Plains, this guy honestly isn't that bad. It's one of the few instances where a mechanic like this can actually work out pretty well. I think we showed it on the low rarity team for the invasions this week, or it's not invasion, I mean Underspire. So yeah, he's not horrible. He also has impervious, oddly enough, which of course is a pretty decent trait. He could even buff up himself if he really wanted to in that context. So you'd probably be wanting to put it more commonly onto something that has a you know, an attack, life, and armor boost ratio, as many Tauruses within the kingdom do. But if you don't, worst comes to worst, put it on him. I think in the other team I'd put it on Soothsayer. You can put it on any summon that you end up getting from the other weapon, as long as they're a Taurus, of course, so you get the double benefit. But yeah, it's one of the few situations where a mechanic like this is not awful, just because of the context of the troop type. Obviously, in the whole realm of everything you'd be using in the game, you're pretty much never touching them. But in Wild Plains and Taurus restrictions, which are pretty common this week, they can end up finding their way into your team. So for once, he is actually kind of useful. It's one of the few times where a buff like that is actually has any kind of real use case. But it's mostly because a lot of things in this category, you know, boost ratio from those two specific stats. Anyways, guys, I hope you all have a wonderful 2025, and I will catch you guys next year. Catch you guys later. Feel free to leave a like on the video. Helps a lot and is greatly appreciated. And goodbye, everyone. Happy New Year.